Yasmin, you're good to go.
Okay, perfect. So, welcome everyone. This is incredible. I feel like I echo what Sophie had said at the beginning. It feels like I'm in the schools right now. So, this is the really neat part about technology, how it can connect everyone across Canada. So, again, thank you so much for everyone for being here today. Let's just kind of do a quick vibe check. How are you guys doing? Can I get some thumbs up? Can you hear me okay? Can I get some waves? Yes, no, maybe I see a few waves. Awesome, fantastic. So, this is meant to be a very interactive, engaging session. So, feel free again to ask questions, right? We have experts in the room. So, this is the time to ask questions. But again, you can also ask questions once this event is over. So, Sarah, if I could just share my screen, I see your slide up.
You bet.
Fantastic. So just give me a moment. I'm just about to share my screen. And just give me a quick thumbs up if you folks can see my screen right now. Okay, fantastic. So, again, welcome everyone to the Youth Action Summit Humanitarian Exchange 2024. My name is Yasmin, and I work as the Training and Education Coordinator for the Canadian Red Cross. And I will also be your lovely MC for today, as well as for the summit on May 17th. So, you're going to see a lot more of me and hear more of me as well. First and foremost, a huge thank you to all the teachers and students joining in live, as well as all the teachers and students who are joining this event asynchronously and watching the recording afterwards. This is super exciting to have all of you joining here with us for this event. And it's going to be a fantastic hour full of lots of knowledge, interaction, as I had mentioned, and exchange of ideas and learning. I wanted to also take the time here to also mention that joining me on the call today, I do have my colleague, Andrea MacArthur, Humanitarian Education Coordinator with the Canadian Red Cross, who is also one of the organizers of the Youth Action Summit. So, Andrea will also be monitoring the chat and posting some resourceful links throughout the exchange as well. Okay, so the Canadian Red Cross recognizes that our operations in the Ottawa area take place on unceded Algonquin territory. The Algonquin people have never relinquished, sold, traded, or transferred ownership of their land. The CRC recognizes and supports the health and wellness goals of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities across Canada and remain committed towards realizing community goals through CRC's ongoing commitments to advancing reconciliation, cultural safety, and integrity, community led programming, and collaboration with Indigenous leadership. Okay, so throughout the course of this event, you folks will be able, as I had mentioned at the beginning, to ask questions during the exchange portion of the event. So we do ask if you do have a question, just hold on to it or write it down. You can also feel free to type it in the chat if you would like, and we will make sure to flag it. You can also come off mute during that time to ask your questions as well. So during today's event, you'll hear from our National Legal Advisor, Sophie Rondeau, as well as returning humanitarian delegate Angela Hill from the Canadian Red Cross on our summit theme on conflict, climate, and migration. If you are watching this recording later asynchronously, please also feel free to send us any questions anytime after the event as well. We see regularly how powerful youth voice can be to share learning, raise awareness, and create action on important humanitarian issues, such as the environmental effects of war and its impact on displacement. We have a few examples here from high school students who shared what they learned after using the online interactive resource Forced to Fight. Now, before we hear from our panelists, before I also introduce the floor to Sarah Flynn, we would also love to open the floor to youth who have joined us today. So feel free to come off chat, come off mute, and let us know what you're looking to gain out of this exchange. So, any thoughts? What are you looking to learn? What are you most excited for? Anyone feeling bold enough to share?
I think they need to
If
warm
not,
up a bit,
that's
man.
totally okay.
I think they're
Yeah,
waiting to
no
hold their
worries.
comments.
That's totally fine. So I will go ahead. No worries. So I will go ahead and pass it off to Sarah Flynn from the Center for Global Education to talk about what they do, some housekeeping rules, and some further introductions. So on to you, Sarah.
Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. We are excited to be hosting you here live from Archbishop MacDonald High School in Edmonton, Alberta. I'm going to throw it over to the students, though, to do their welcome. Michaela, you're up first.
I will be doing the land acknowledgement. So, Archbishop MacDonald High School acknowledges Treaty 6 territory, the ancestral and the traditional territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, as well as the Métis. We acknowledge that the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. We are appreciative for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. As an act of reconciliation, we recognize the land and give gratitude to those on whose territory we reside or visit.
Thank you so much, Michaela. All right, welcome. All right, we have another friend here.
Hi, my name's Keziah, and I'm a grade 11 high school student at Archbishop MacDonald. Archbishop MacDonald High School is an academic high school with a large population of students in our IB and French immersion programs. We are a diverse community of students and staff members who value the importance of being involved in our world and giving back. Within our school, we are home to a variety of school clubs, such as Social Justice and Model UN. Students at MAC are very passionate in discussing topics like humanitarian aid. This year, we hosted 2 beginner Model UN conferences where students in Catholic and public school divisions are able to debate and discuss global topics. And here, we understand that we are very privileged to have the capability to be able to make such impacts on topics like humanitarian aid, and that's why we are so passionate in learning more.
Thank you so much. Oh, that was wonderful. Yeah. It can be intimidating to get up here in front of 60 of your peers and in front of the schools joining from across Canada. So I want to thank our students for joining us, but thank all of our students from all of our sides. I threw up a map here we have a little projection going on over here, but you'll see it across your screens that we have kids from across the country joining, and we even have a school from Trinidad joining today just to hear this important conversation because it transcends local. It transcends regional. It is a national topic. It is a global topic. All of these issues that we'll be talking about today with our friends from the Canadian Red Cross are so integral to our lives. It's across the news media. It's across TikTok. It's everywhere. You can't go and not be confronted by these issues and have to build the skills to learn how to listen and marinate on them and debate about them and then come to some sort of settlement within yourself about how can I take action? How can I make change in my community? So we're so excited to bring everyone together to host this conversation today. Quick sort of agenda overview. We're going to talk about why is student action important. We're going to listen to some of these issues from our very expert panel that will be sharing experiences that they have had in the field, that they have learned about, that they have advocated for, and how even you can get involved. We'll have some time for question and answer. So, I mean, there will be opportunity to talk, but if you have a question burning in your brain, you can write it down, you can raise your hand, you can put it in the chat. Our friends online from the Canadian Red Cross and here at CGE will be monitoring the chat, whether you're on YouTube, who are joining, hello YouTube, or here live in the meeting space. Just put those notes in and we'll get them to the speakers. And last, we're going to do a call to action. So this isn't a one-on thing. This is a part one of a two-part series. So we're going to learn you all up today. You're going to get brains full of knowledge, full of excitement, and then we're going to come back in a month and see what you did with that. Because it's not just about learning about these issues, it's about making it personal, about understanding why it's important and realizing you have the privilege and the space and the amazing support of your teachers to do work about it, to take action. And so we're going to come back and see what you've done, or if you've made plans, all of that in 1 month's time. So without further ado, I'm going to throw over to welcome some of our schools. We have Archbishop MacDonald, who did a lovely introduction. I'm going to put them on the spot. Our friends from Trinidad, if one of you would like to come to the camera and get ready to introduce your school, that would be fantastic. I know your teacher, Miss McKenzie, is so fantastic at helping to facilitate that. We also have some friends under the name Amina. Whoa, yeah, would you like to unmute and just say hello and tell us where you're joining from?
We are joining from MRA. Ontario.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And do we have another school? Go ahead. All right, Trinidad. Okay, thank you to our friends from Ontario. And now to our friends in Trinidad. Would you like to say hello?
Good day. Our school is Queen's Royal College. We are all boys school, and we're located in Port of Spain of Trinidad and Tobago.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. And now, are there any other of our friends who would like to share today? Okay, I know I have one more video here that just, of course, crashed. But let's see if I can bring it back up. There we go. Okay, I'm going to bring it up here and share from another school that is joining us. They're going to watch this later today online, and I wanted to make sure they got their shout out.
Hi, my name is Anthony, and I'm representing York Mills Collegiate Institute. First, the land acknowledgement. I acknowledge that I am on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. I also acknowledge the enduring presence of First Nations peoples, Métis, and Inuit. What I enjoyed about completing the Forced to Fight activity was going through all the question marks in Miguel's story and learning about the various international humanitarian laws that are applicable in times of conflict, particularly in regards to mitigating some of the environmental damages that are associated with war. Completing the activity has certainly made me interested in exploring other ways that international laws are relieving situations, and more importantly, additional things we could be doing to continue mitigating the repercussions of war.
Wonderful. Just such a great welcome and such a great framing of why we're here today, what we're going to talk about, what we hope to learn. I'm going to welcome our friend Yasmin at Canadian Red Cross to come back on, but also her colleagues. Angela is joining us today. Lee is a teacher who's joining us and will come into the room in a little bit later, and him and his students are going to be sharing about the work that they're doing at their school. And again, our friend Sophie from the Canadian Red Cross will bring her expertise to the conversation. So Yasmin, thank you for this amazing event that you're hosting today. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you everyone for that introduction as, oh, can you hear me okay? And thumbs up if you can hear my audio. No, yes, maybe so. And can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So it might just be on Sarah's end. And for those classes, those of you in class online, thumbs up if you can just hear my audio. Oh, okay. So I'm getting some thumbs up. So it seems like some people can hear the audio, some people can't. Can you hear the audio, Sarah?
We're back. We just had a speaker cut out. Live.
Wonderful. No problem. Amazing. So thank you everyone so much for those lovely introductions. It's always so nice to see what value everyone takes from learning these things. So it's very fantastic to hear as well. So I will go ahead and introduce Sophie and bring Sophie to the floor to talk about how IHL is supposed to protect the environment in armed conflict. So on to you, Sophie.
Worst time to take a sip of water. Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you very, very much. I'm very excited. I don't want to take my whole 10 minutes just to show how excited I am, but thank you for everybody that read the land acknowledgement, introducing yourself. I really feel like we're part of something bigger. And what we're bringing to the table is a small feat. You'll see I'm bringing legal expertise. It's one part of the answer, but I'm very, very grateful. And I feel it's a big privilege to be with all of you from all over Canada, from all over the world. Very, very exciting and happy to partner with CGE. Without further ado, if I do my job well, you'll have more questions than answer at the end of my 10 minutes. My presentation is to give you the legal framework around how the law protects the environment in a situation of armed conflict. And as we know, it's more complex than that. It's not just always armed conflict, it's also situation of violence, and everything gets mixed up, but we'll focus on international humanitarian law. And then I'll have the privilege to have my colleague Angela to bring a more operational perspective, talking from the work of the Red Cross in the field. Yasmin, if you want to start sharing the slide, or Sarah, I'm not sure, we can dive into the PowerPoint. This PowerPoint can be shared to you if you want to geek out on IHL and you want to have all the articles and everything that will be in the slide. I'll try not to bother you with that during the presentation. You let me know if it's better if I share my screen or if that can be, here you go. So let's go. Protection of natural environment under IHL. As I said, the focus is really on environment. The first thing that I can say, I'm a lawyer, our answer are usually twofold. It depends, and we need a definition. So how do we define environment? It's defined different ways, and there are different bodies of law that protects the environment. Not just international humanitarian law, you also have international environmental law. So you have the different programs, the different treaty that applies to the environment, and you also have the treaties here that apply in situation of armed conflict, and you have different bodies of law. I wanted to bring that forward because the focus on armed conflict is a bit narrow, but it has impact beyond this. And the definition of what constitutes an environment in the legal work is always a challenge, but you have the legal framework captured in the slide. We can move on already to the next slide to really dive into armed conflict. So just another click. I don't know why it's, yeah, thank you. So what is international humanitarian law? I've seen some of your questions. They were very high level. So for some of you, that might be already very easy, but just as a recap, what is IHL? It's the set of rules that seeks for humanitarian reason to limit the effect of armed conflict. So it protects the people that are not fighting or that are no longer participating, so people that are wounded, that are hors combat, and also it restricts the means and the methods of warfare. Though the way that you're usually waging war, there are limits to that. Spoiler, this is where protection of the environment comes in. The way that you're waging war, IHL provides boundaries into what you can and cannot do. If it affects the environment, you're not getting any military advantage out of this. You're just plundering the resources that are needed for the civilian population. So next slide. I always show this one. That's my definition of IHL, and that's also the technical aspect. Humanitarian law applies only in situation of armed conflict. So it's a realistic body of law that also deals with the fact that armed conflict exists. If you just put your hand in the sand and you say it doesn't exist, you won't have rules to protect the people that are living in the worst situation of violence. So IHL is humanitarian consideration. As a Red Crosser, that weighs heavily on the balance, but there's also the military necessity, and it's always balancing the two to make sure that it's applied in the field and that actually people that are waging war can identify and can take ownership of those rules. So that's a quick definition of what IHL is. So why is it important that we look at the interplay between the environment and IHL? Well, the natural environment is frequently a silent casualty of war. From the question that I've seen and from the interaction that I've heard, I'm preaching to the choir. You're aware of that, but this is one of the elements that needs to be addressed. 20 years ago, it wasn't that obvious. Now it's really, really top of mind. So things are evolving and the body of law is also following those evolution. Next slide, please. Environmental damages, they have severe and they have complex consequences for conflict affected population. We'll dive into it. There are immediate consequences, but there are also long-term consequences. So by no way is this something that should be taken lightly. In the next slide, I have a few examples. So I'll just walk you through it. It gives you a general idea. The Vietnam War that happened in the 70s, there were defoliation missiles that were being used. So companies were spraying defoliating Agent Orange, kind of all over the area of the Mekong Delta, and that caused direct and long-term damages to the environment. Since then, those type of weapons have been prohibited under IHL, but this is one example. Next slide, please. Kuwait in 1991, there were smoke plumes from a few of the Kuwait oil fires. So targeting the oil complex may bring some military advantage, but the impact on the environment, so the impact on the civilian population, is so disproportionate that this is not something that was allowed under IHL. So this is another example from Kuwait of 1991, maybe a little bit before you were born. Next slide, please. Serbia, 1999, closer to the end of the 20th century, the bombing of a petrochemical plant by the NATO forces. So not just non-state armed groups, but the NATO forces did bomb a petrochemical plant. This causes problem under IHL, and the analysis and the application of the rule is something that needs to be addressed. This is another example of the impact of the environment when in armed conflict. Next slide, please. I think it's the last example that I have. Afghanistan in 2006, you can see the Kabul River here that has been damaged by many sequences of attacks. So not just one, but kind of the addition of everything that was happening caused irreversible damages to the environment. And this is something that needs to be addressed by the legal framework. Next slide, please. So how does IHL protect the natural environment? Well, it prohibits the widespread, long-term, and severe damage to the environment, to the natural environment, and it prohibits attacking the natural environment by way of reprisal. Reprisal means, well, you attacked my my military compound, I'm gonna attack your petrochemical compound. This is not acceptable. Reprisal are not a way to wage war. These are kind of the twofold element that IHL applies in those situations. Next slide, please. So what can be done to strengthen the protection? To enhance the protection of the environment in armed conflict, greater respect for IHL remains critical. So that's the main angle from the Red Cross of actually engaging with all the population, including youth, to know more about IHL, but also engaging with those weapon bearers, with the armed forces. That's why we work with the Canadian Armed Forces, with the government. So we work at all the level so that there is greater respect that can be implemented. Next slide, please. How do you hold people accountable when those laws are not being respected? Because that's what you're going to tell me. I show you the pictures of different attacks, and well, there are rules, but there are violations. In many instances, those rules are implemented and they're respected, and they're limiting the impact of the armed conflict. But in some cases, there are violations that are taking place. What can be done in those cases if all the implementation, all the training did not necessarily work out? Well, we have accountability mechanism for conflict-related harm against the environment. First thing, individual criminal liability, accusing somebody at the criminal level, like an individual level, and domestically or internationally, and getting the punishment for being a war criminal because you did commit a violation of IHL and an act toward the environment. You also have state responsibility. You can actually have mechanism that gets whatever country, Canada, Finland, Kuwait, any state, and there's a mechanism that is super complex. If you want to go into international law, you have your work cut out for you. You can work on that subject for 50, 60, 70 years, but there are those mechanisms to hold state accountable for those violations. If those two fold you're exploring, there's another one, civil responsibility. That's a whole fold that's even beyond the armed conflict, to get compensation for damages to the environment. These are litigation that have taken place on that. And on the more political level, if you're way into working for the UN, whether in Geneva or in New York, sanction and international pressure and all those political mechanisms, they help address the violations that are committed by IHL. So I'll dive into this in my next couple of slides, and then I can hand back the floor to my colleague Angela to kind of give you an ops perspective. So just so you have it, this is a little bit at the in French we say periphery, on the side of IHL, but there's always appetite for this. So I've put in those slides so you do have some meat on the bone. What are the possible avenues for prosecuting the destruction of the natural environment in front of the International Criminal Court? As you may know, we have a permanent international court in The Hague since 2000, and it actually implements responsibility for individual. So you can have somebody that's accused of a war crime, of a crime against humanity, of genocide or crime of aggression. And in those 4 crimes, it's possible to address destruction of the natural environment. So the mechanism exists. Of course, the implementation really relies on political will and different situation, but the context in which the war is waged is also the context in which peace is negotiated. So we have to deal with the same actor. As you say, we need extra hand. If you want to join us in that in fighting the good fight from the international community, we have the tools. We just maybe we need more people joining on the good fight. Next slide, please. There are efforts to address environmental harm. These are really recent examples. So this is law in the making, and I think it's very exciting. If you go into law, this is going to be, I think, what you're going to be researching or working on. One example is Cambodia. In the International Criminal Court, there is a case on land grabbing. So there are communications happening right now. So this is something, although not fully fledged, that's ongoing. You do have special jurisdiction for peace and reconciliation in Colombia with indigenous groups. So these mechanisms are super interesting. In Colombia, there was an armed conflict going on for many, many years. It stopped, very rare in the history recently, but there's still some impact on that. So the special jurisdiction do play a key role in addressing environmental harm. And you also have a lot of research on the crime of ecocide. So ecocide is kind of a soft law element. It's not something that is as legally framed as other issues that we might see, but there is a draft definition for this new international crime. There's a lot of research happening on that. So these are 3 examples that kind of show you how we can act as an international community on that front. Next slide, please.
Apologies, Sophie. Sorry to interrupt, but you just have about 1 minute to just wrap up before we hand it off to Angela.
I'm pretty proud of myself because I have 1 slide left and I think it's going to be awesome. Thank you, Yasmin. So the last one is mostly for you to have it in writing if you have a keen interest on the subject. There is a crime against the environment or ecocide, and that's the example of the draft. As you can see, it's from a foundation. So it's really civil society. It's all of us trying to push a definition so that the government actually abide to it and make it a treaty. We're not there yet, but for me, it's very exciting because it's all about the process, and having those discussions is something that's really important. So here on the slide, you have what is the proposed definition of an ecocide. Maybe in 20 years, you'll be doing this webinar with a group of high school students, and you will be saying, oh, we have a treaty on ecocide, and this is the formal legal definition. That's what we are aiming at. So I think if you go to the next slide, I think it's my thank you slide. Yes, I want to thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to your question. Some questions have been submitted in advance, so we can tackle those during the discussion. If we don't have time, we can always follow up online. So I know time is limited here, but I'm very excited to be able, and thank you very much for your attention on my presentation.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Sophie. I will go ahead and pass it off to Angela. Angela, the floor is yours.
Thanks. So as it was mentioned, I'm a Canadian Red Cross delegate. So what that means is when there is a situation that needs more support from the international Red Cross community, I often travel with Canadian Red Cross, either in a communications or in a community engagement capacity, to support the Red Cross of that country. If you want to pop open my slides, we're going to start. I'm going to sort of tell stories of some of the places that we have worked recently, and sort of where you see either climate change or conflict, or how climate change and conflict are both affecting people who have been displaced because of, whatever circumstances they are facing. So I want to start in Somaliland. So on the Horn of Africa, they used to have cyclical droughts of, basically every 5 or 6 months, there would be a dry season. People would migrate to areas where there was water, and then it would rain again, and this would go on. With climate change, the periods of drought, instead of a few months, are lasting a few years, which means there is greater competition for resources. There is less access. These are people who are historically nomadic, which means they are usually herders, people who have animals. So there's less resources for those creatures to eat. And we end up in a situation like we were in 2023, where we were looking at a situation of extreme hunger, possibly famine. So I was there with Canadian Red Cross to help people understand what was happening, what the situation was. A lot of kids were malnourished. So what you see in the picture here is a clinic run by the Somali Red Crescent Society in a rural area. And this is where they can check kids to see if they are still healthy, and those who need some extra nutritional support, extra food, can receive it through the clinic and help support the community as a whole. But this is a place where we really see climate change having a real everyday impact in communities. And then what you also see is increased competition for those resources, so increased conflict. So in some cases, people are being displaced. So normally they would raise their animals in one area, and then what happens is the drought forces them to move to a city, and then ongoing conflict forces them to move again. So we're seeing cases of people impacted by initial migration or initial displacement, and then again. So just as they get set up, they move again. So this is just one example of where we see displacement and conflict and climate change and the environment really having an impact on the everyday lives of people. Next slide. Another is in the Bahamas and actually the Caribbean. It's great to see people from Trinidad and Tobago here. I worked in Trinidad and Tobago for 2 years after Hurricane Dorian struck. And Hurricane Dorian, for those that don't know, was a massive hurricane that came in late 2019. And instead of blowing through as a hurricane usually does, it kind of froze over top of a number of islands and caused massive destruction. So this, I mean, it was described to me as people as the storm of the century. They'd never seen anything like it before. And those who had already been displaced once, so in the area of Bahamas where were the worst hit, in an island called Abaco, a lot of people working there were migrants from Haiti. So people who had fled violence and conflict in Haiti were then in Bahamas, living and working there, but perhaps not in the strongest of houses or more in temporary housing. So when you have a big storm, the people who are the hardest hit are those in temporary housing. So you can see here a picture of a community that had been set up for Haitians was completely destroyed. I mean, obviously there's not a building, a house, tent, anything left. So these are people, again, where you see that interplay of conflict leading to displacement, and then a climate change related superstorm causing displacement again. So we see this sort of as we travel around the world, this interplay between the two. Another example I want to give is Canadian. So if you go to the next slide, we aren't in conflict here, but we often see, disproportional displacement. So last summer, I'm sure most of you remember that thick smoke that affected almost everybody in Canada as huge portions of the Northwest Territories were on fire. There was massive evacuation orders given, and people had to travel from their community all the way down to Edmonton. And I think we have schools joining us from Edmonton today, so you probably remember that. So we were there as Canadian Red Cross to support people with those basic needs as they arrive, shelter, where can they go and get food? For a lot of people, this is, a trip that they might make once a year with lots of planning, not a 24-hour drive nonstop with this fear that you might not be able to go home. We also see in situations like this, Indigenous communities are disproportionately impacted. And one of the important pieces of work that Canadian Red Cross does is work with communities ahead of time to talk about what an evacuation could look like, or talk about how people could be more prepared, could be more ready. So it's not a matter of, oh, there's a fire, you need to be moved, because that has a lot of historical trauma within the Canadian context around white people showing up and saying, you need to get out. So a lot of really important work needs to happen when we talk about, and we see ongoing climate change having greater impact on wildfires. It's like every year, it's like, oh, this is the worst wildfire season on record. Oh, no, wait, this is the worst wildfire season on record. This is continuing and continuing. And so we need to be preparing and having these conversations. I am cognizant of time, so I feel like I'm going to keep flying through these. I am sorry. So the next slide is Bangladesh. So this is a case where I want to say the conflict came first and the climate change impact is second. So in 2017, there was a mass displacement of people fleeing violence in Myanmar and coming into Bangladesh, where they settled on hillsides in this peninsula surrounded by water. You can see in this picture how a lot of the trees have been removed. So all of these hills used to be covered with trees. You can see a few on the left-hand side of the screen there. Of course, those were all removed to make room for shelters, which are, bamboo and tarps for the most part. This is also an area that gets really bad monsoons, and the monsoon seasons have been getting worse and worse and worse. Again, this is something that is being contributed to climate change. And you can imagine looking at these, like how this water rising through the middle would cause significant issues. How, lots of rain would cause these muddy slopes to slide and give way, and for these structures to not be able to withstand. So another area, again, where we're seeing this interplay between what's happening in the environment, further impacting people who are already displaced because of conflict. And Canadian Red Cross has been there providing health services. And actually, a lot of these tarps are from Canada. They were donated by the government of Canada. So we do see where Canadians, even though it's overseas, are being able to help. And the last one I just want to quickly touch on is Ukraine. So I know you talked about this in previous sessions, so I'll just be really quick. We see long, cold winters happening. People have been displaced internally. And, having enough support. So this is mattresses and blankets being delivered to an apartment complex that is being used as temporary shelters for people. I mean, temporary in the sense that people hope to go home a year ago and they're still there. But longer, colder winters, meaning more heating sources are needed. The conflict often impacts things like power plants, areas where you'd have electricity generated, dams have been impacted. So it's not as simple as just being able to turn on your heat or plug in a heater. So these are all things that we're taking into account, and how the environment and what's happening on a climate level really impacts how we structure support, and how resources are allocated is based on this. So, protecting people from long, cold winters. So I think I've got one more slide, and I think it's a let me talk slide. Yeah, okay, perfect. Oh, so that one's perfect. If you want to just pop back, perfect. So one of the things that I was asked to speak about is, talking about how as students, you can be involved. So you can say, wow, Angela's gone to all these places. This is what she does. She's a humanitarian, but it's not really about, air quote, being a humanitarian. It's really about, having a passion, caring about other people, and seeing how you can follow your passion and become involved. So I didn't set out to be a humanitarian. I am a journalist as a background. I do communications, I take pictures, do video. And this has allowed me to grow and be able to tell the stories of people who are impacted by climate change, people who are impacted by conflict. But I work alongside a team of doctors and nurses, or technical people who are geniuses setting up water supply facilities, who can figure out how to, do water pumps that can work for a really long time. I work alongside people who are experts in human resources and financial people, so they can help communities grow and flourish. Because when we talk about supporting, it's not just about showing up and saving people. It's about helping provide resources so the community continue to be resilient. People know what's best for their recovery. They know what's best to support their communities, and we're there to help support that resilience. And I think when we talk about what can be done right now, what you can do as students is being informed, sharing information with each other, with the people in your lives, your trusted adults. If you have the opportunity to reach out and speak with decision makers, this is where we can have a real impact as often as possible. So I think that's it for my time. I will stop. I'll throw back to Yasmin, because I think that's who's up next. And there is a question and answer period, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Huge thank you to Sophie for speaking about the ways in which the environment is a casualty of war and how IHL protects the environment. And Angela for speaking on your firsthand experiences of seeing the effects that climate change has on individuals and communities. Angela will also be joining us for the summit on May 17th. So it'll be fantastic hearing some updates from you again. But I definitely, and I think we all echo that sentiment where you as the youth can take that action, right? Knowledge is power. So having that knowledge is extremely powerful in your hands of being able to be informed, as Angela had touched on, and also really turning that information into action as well. So thank you both so incredibly much. I do see that Lee is now in the room, so I will pass the floor off to Lee to introduce himself and introduce what his students have to say as well. So on to you, Lee.
Thanks. So my name's Lee Muthing, and I'm a teacher in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded homeland of the Mi'kmaq people. And I teach at Horton High School near Wolfville, Nova Scotia. And so as a teacher, it was really great seeing all the other presentations because I feel often in school we see a lot of the dire side of information. You know, I see on social media pictures of war, pictures, especially now, of all the increasing conflict. And in school, we often study a lot of, you know, the kind of more dire history. We study World War II, we study wars, we study displacement of people. And so we're often shown the negative, which we often tend to focus on. And I realize in some of my own classes, I'm a teacher who teaches both English and social studies. But again, we often were focusing on the negative, and I felt often leaving students and even teachers kind of dispirited about human nature. And so when I started working with the Red Cross doing IHL, it was really a great balance to seeing all of the negative. You know, here's groups and systems that have really tried to work and develop tools that are really trying to protect people that are stuck in these terrible situations that we often see. And so, for example, in some of my classes, we look at books such as the book Refugee by Alan Gratz, which really helps sensitize us to the plight of different people stuck in situations of conflict around the world. However, at the end, we focus on things like IHL to understand that there are good people doing good things and that the kind of nature of humans is not just based in conflict. There are plenty of people, I would argue majority of people, who really want these terrible things not to happen and are working very much, as we've just seen, in wonderful ways to support and help and either make the best of the terrible situation or try to prevent the situations from happening in the first place and to hold those who take part in them accountable. And I've had the great luck of having some wonderful students who, after taking part in the IHL, decided to actually take a lot of the materials and create a workshop that they then took to a middle school and further taught some students there. And so this is both a teacher and I hope for students, you know, when you see these things, you really take heart. We're presented with so many terrible things every day, but that's not the whole picture. And when we look at these tools, when we study them, we understand that, when we share them with others, having that sense of agency, that ability to take part, to educate, to take action, I think is the thing that can give us hope. So I really hope you enjoy all of the firsthand accounts here and you use that to make a difference. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lee, for sharing the experience that your students have had. I think it's really just a testament to how much this knowledge has value and how much it can inspire us to really make change and be a part of that change as well. So thank you so much. So this is part of the exchange where we now open the floor to questions to you folks sitting here in the room. So again, feel free to come off mute. Feel free to type your questions in the chat. But if you have any burning questions, any sort of thing you want to clarify, anything you want to learn a little bit more about, feel free to come forward, ask your questions. We have our experts in the room. So really feel free to connect with us with those questions. So I now open the floor to you folks in the classrooms to ask those questions.
So maybe if we have our friend at St. Matthew's, I know that they were eager to introduce our classroom, but they just missed our little spot at the beginning. If they wanted to start us off, then they could do a little introduction and ask their first question of the speakers. So St. Matthew, we're gonna throw over to you maybe as you can start with a welcome, and then in the background you can have someone coming up with their question.
Hi. You caught us by surprise. You got a question? We're trying.
Okay, I have someone here. So why don't you guys mute and think about it, and then have someone come up, and then they'll be back up to our friend here. So say your name and then your question.
My name's Shane Bolo. So my question is, how would you hold a country like the United States accountable for crimes like let's say an Operation Desert Storm with all with all the destruction and stuff where they burn oil and stuff?
Thank you. No, that's great. Thank you so much. It's hard to ask these questions. So awesome. Okay, over to our friends at the Canadian Red Cross.
I can take a first stab at this one. I think that's the kind of answer. Yeah, that's the heart of it, isn't it? Like, how do you hold somebody accountable? So there's twofold. We can go 45 hours on this. This is what we do with university classes. I'm going to try to give you the 30-second answer. I'm going to link it back with the Lay's comment. We always see when it's not going well, and it's really hard to capture when things are actually functioning. So there are many instances where the American armed forces are actually abiding to the body of law that is IHL. And I did mention the Vietnam War, the events that happened with the My Lai, which is one of the tools that we have in our learning kit, was kind of a key moment for the American forces to actually revisit and kind of reinforce their training in terms of IHL. And since then, I mean, the training was implemented in a way that it meets the IHL standard. That being said, there are many situations that it's challenging. The type of violation that have been made. You mentioned Desert Storm, these operations. How do you hold a state accountable? One of the answers is you have the legal tools, but you need to have the political will. So, like, there's some big question and some smaller changes, some smaller solution. One of the thing is government will abide to the rules that they decide to buy in. So that's one. That's why you need to vote and put in parliament or in Congress the people that you think carry your vision, so that they will commit to international standard. You do have an international criminal court now. You have domestic mechanism. This is all around political will, but you also have sanctions that are not necessarily putting people behind bars, but affecting the diplomatic relationship, the commercial cycle. That's where civil society, the people that are not part of the government, adding that pressure might lead to some conclusion. You have to understand that it's complementarity. So it's not necessarily putting a finger and actually saying you are accused of committing a war crime. That's one way of doing it, and we're doing it. We have instances for that, but there are other ways of actually addressing. I think the US plays such a big role politically in terms of overall security that's a hard one to tackle. I think they've made some movement has been made at the UN level, at the international level, and within the community, but it's really hard to grasp. As I said, if you look at all the means that can be put forward, we do see some improvement and we do see some accountability, but you kind of need to do a little bit more of a deep dive. I have done more than 30 seconds, but I'll stop there. And if you want any additional tools, I can always do some research if that's something that interests you. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything, but back to you, Sarah.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Sophie. As you say, I think it is a question that you could develop a whole class to. Like, not just one class, but like a whole course. I see that our friends over in Trinidad and Tobago and Miss McKendy's class have lined themselves up in front of the computer, so I'm going to throw over to them. And then we're going to hit St. Matthew's, so you guys get ready.
Hello. I'd like to ask, do you think it's appropriate to lend countries dangerous arms that could possibly promote more violence and damage to the environment?
again, I want to take a stab at this one. Thank you very much. Such an important question. You're mentioning something that captures the international community and everybody right now. So you have identified something that everybody's trying to answer. And of course, the answer is complicated. So what is it appropriate that a state actually supports another state by providing weapons and then kind of making violence more accessible and feeding into war instead of kind of pulling back? That in itself is a big question. Usually the first step, and we're kind of there, is you're not actually participating to the armed conflict. And right now, I mean, states are a little bit more reluctant to actually actively participate in armed conflict. That's success in itself. We're seeing it in Ukraine for other reason, because we don't want to trigger the NATO kind of association, but we have that. But the second best thing of not supporting directly would be to give weapons and to give transfer. Is it appropriate from a humanitarian perspective? And it's my Red Cross hat, but it's also me. No, it's not appropriate. And it's something that needs to be challenged and needs to be addressed and looked into. Why? Because there is a legal framework around it. So just in Canada, we have the Arms Trade Treaty. It's a law that actually say you should not transfer weapon if you know that violation of IHL would be committed. That's the legal framework. We need to make sure that it's implemented correctly, and we need to hold the government accountable for that. We have the tools. I think we need to push it a little bit forward. Maybe I can share that with you, but right now in different states, in Canada included, but also in Germany, in Netherlands, there are cases in front of court to actually challenge that, to actually say, well, how are you accountable and why do you do that? So it's a very complex question, but there are actions that are being taken right now. And I did my research last night. I can share an article that kind of captures all of those things. Maybe a little bit high level, but you'll get all of the resources on that. But thank you. That's one thing that keeps it like that. That's part of our work at the Red Cross, of actually answering your question.
Amazing. And such a good question. It's so timely. Oh, go ahead. You had a follow up there?
No, I was just thanking you.
Oh, thanks so much. All right, St. Matthews, how is the question generation coming on your side?
Okay, can you hear us?
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
we have a question. Sarah's shy. They're all being very shy. Are you gonna say?
Okay.
Yeah. So what role do NGOs play in monitoring and promoting compliance with the IHL?
Thank you so much, Sarah. Great job.
Laws. Thank you.
All right, Angela, we've heard from Sophie. Sophie, you can of course address it again, but I want to give Angela a chance to speak as well. What do you, how do you respond to that question, or any of the others?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's largely going to fall back to Sophie. Sorry, Sophie. But what I can say is different NGOs, we're all designed to complement each other, right? So different NGOs, different organizations so some might be focused, say, on food, others maybe on healthcare. Red Cross is really about working with communities in place. The other arm of the Red Cross, the International Committee of Red Cross, could play a greater role. But I might have to throw to Sophie, because when it really comes to monitoring IHL, it's not really my area of expertise.
Thank you, Angela. So very quickly, the job of the Red Cross is to alleviate suffering wherever it is found. That's our job. And the conditions in which we work need to be optimal for us to do that. So it means that we're neutral and we're impartial. We're talking to everybody, and we need to maintain the trust of all the parties involved. We're definitely in action. It doesn't mean that we're not looking at peace or accountability, but this is not our focus area. There are other organizations that are doing that. So in terms, and I'm going to give you a short answer, in terms of documenting violation of IHL that may feed in international criminal court proceedings or any kind of proceeding, there's an exemption. So the states actually recognize the role of the Red Cross, and the delegates, such as Angela, they have an exemption not to testify in front of those judicial body, because if we do so, it's going to jeopardize the work that we do in the field. If the doors are closed, the people that are vulnerable and that are exposed to suffering, they will have nobody to actually alleviate that. So that is paramount that we keep those relationships. of course, there are exchange of information, and I mean, there's other actors in the field, but this is a specific situation for the Red Cross where we're not as vocal as other organizations because of the nature of our mandate. But excellent question all around. I'm giving you A+ to all of those questions. You're definitely putting all the challenging things out there. Angela, I see you have your hand up, so maybe I'll pass the floor back to you.
Unmute. There you go. I can actually give an example when she says that. So when we look at the case of people fleeing from Myanmar into Bangladesh, because of language usage, because of Red Cross's ability to have and work in partnership with governments in multiple countries, Red Cross in Myanmar was able to access communities that no other NGO could work with. So we were able to work with the people who hadn't fled the violence and with people who had and had come to Bangladesh and with the host communities in Bangladesh, right? So our ability to be neutral, our ability to say, we're going to focus on the immediate humanitarian needs, the immediate humanitarian necessities of life, allowed us to access that, while others were very outspoken about the conflict that was happening, the situations that were occurring. So and we sort of all work in concert, right? So if we can focus and have access, then it leaves another group to be able to speak out that maybe would not be able to then have access.
So there's one last question here, but I'll throw to Yasmin, who has a few others. Oh my goodness, we're running out of time, but maybe we can get to one of ours that was sent in by a school who's going to be watching this on YouTube later today. But the question here that was asked offline is, Angela, how do people get into doing the field work? Like, we all kind of know how to become a lawyer, sorry, Sophie, but how do people get involved in doing field work? If this is their passion and they want to help people directly in the field, they want to see that impact. How did you get started?
And so I was maybe trying to touch on this a little bit earlier, but my biggest recommendation is if you want to do field work is figure out your passion and follow that. So this idea that you would become a humanitarian as a job or sort of go into the field and just help isn't the most helpful. I think the best thing we can do as being from the global north is train in an area, use the privilege we have to get higher education, to get expertise. And then when we go into the field, we can go and help build the expertise there. We can pay local staff to do things like paint buildings or help us set things up. But what we can take is an expertise that we can then transfer. So not only are we helping in cases of emergency, but we are leaving behind a skill set. So perhaps the next emergency, there are people locally who are able to continue to do that work, maybe without sending someone from the international community. And so when I say follow your passion, it could be anything. Maybe you're interested in a healthcare field. Maybe you're interested in law. Maybe you're interested in journalism. Maybe you're interested in social work or even technical areas. People think like, oh, well, I don't want to go to university. I want to go to college, but and do like a technical college piece. When we travel with the Canadian Red Cross Field Hospital, so areas where hospitals have collapsed and we need to set up new hospitals, we don't just travel with doctors and nurses. We have the teams that set up the water and sanitation. They run, massive generators to power things. They run water treatment facilities and how to get that to different areas of the community. We need people who can, fix vehicles with not having all the equipment they might want. So where your passion lies is the best way that you will eventually be able to make an impact. So, train in the areas you want to train, follow what your dreams are, and that is the best way to then become an expert and support others. And remember that, I think the best case scenario is you can go and help when it's needed, but leaving that knowledge and helping grow the support in the communities. Thanks.
Well, I think that I know, Yasmin, that we have more questions that maybe we want to stay on a little bit after and try to address some of those. So the recording's a little bit longer than our live students who might need to leave. But that was such a great segue into what students can do now. Yasmin, did you want to take that off now and say, what are the next steps here as we're charging them for the next month before we come back together again?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, so much for those wonderful, insightful questions and for all of the answers. For those of you who typed answer or questions in the chat, or who have also, emailed us questions ahead of time, unfortunately, we may not have had the time to go through them, but we will be going through those questions and sending those answers out as well in a follow-up email. So you will be getting answers to your questions. They will not be going unnoticed, so don't worry. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and just let me know that you can see my slides. Okay, fantastic. So just touching on the poster campaign, which is the call to action this year, every little bit done by students to share messaging, promoting awareness and respect for international humanitarian law, humanitarian issues, and humanitarian values has an impact on decisions and behaviors. So whether at the individual, community, or institutional levels. Youth-led learning and action is really the key here. So we do hope that you as the youth feel inspired to learn and inspired to apply your learnings into action. So this is a really good example of a poster that has been done in the past. And then this is how the poster campaign works. So really the key here is to, one, communicate key facts about the issue. So we're looking at 3 factoids and 3 rules of IHL, and also communicating 3 things that can be done. So you can choose from the following on the screen. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. However, your teachers do have these packages as well. So if you want to go a little bit more into detail out of the options that you do have in terms of factoids, in terms of 3 things that can be done, definitely connect with your teacher. They have that package. Ideas for 3 issues to focus on can also be pulled from lessons learned in today's event, which is also available as a recording, as well as the fact-finding mission sheets available in the summit activity pack that your teachers received as well. So this recording will be available to watch once it's sent out as well. And then these also link back to the stories in Forced to Fight. You can also highlight other topics related to armed conflict and international humanitarian law in your poster. And then students can also take on their own action project, and you're not just limited to doing a poster. So although a poster campaign is the call to action, if you're feeling like you want to do something else other than a poster, that's completely okay. And one thing to mention about the poster as well, you don't need to be an expert or a professional at creating a poster, right? This is really meant for putting that information, creating awareness. So you also don't need to be an expert at creating posters to take part in this campaign as well. But here are just a few examples on the slide of other different project ideas that you could engage with as well. And as an example, we have 2 youth who created a short video for our first Youth Action Summit that we first ran. And then students who submit a poster campaign in time for the summit showcase will also be entered into a draw for one of 3 book prize packs. So groups, classes, or clubs can receive a group prize, and individuals can receive the prize as individuals or for their class or club if they prefer. So here on the screen are just a few of the different books that are up for prizes as well. Okay, so before we conclude this meeting, before we talk about the survey, I just really wanted to take a moment to thank a few people who made this event possible, who made it a very engaging, knowledgeable event. So a huge thank you to our panelists, Sophie Rondeau and Angela Hill, for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us. Another very big thank you to the Center for Global Education and my colleague Andrea MacArthur for all of your extensive behind the scenes work in organizing this event and the Youth Action Summit. And finally, thank you to all the teachers and students who join us today, whether you are live or watching the recording asynchronously. As I had previously mentioned, knowledge is power, and we really hope that you are leaving this exchange excited to share that knowledge with others as well. Okay, so here we have a slide that shows a QR code to a quick evaluation, and we will also post the link to the evaluation in the chat. This evaluation will also be open for the next 2 months. So if you're watching the recording asynchronously, you will also have access after this event for the next 2 months to complete this evaluation with your feedback. And for those of you joining the live today, feel free to take the time now to complete the survey, but you can also complete this at a later time that conveniences you as well. Okay, fantastic. So I know that we are a little bit over time, so I will just go ahead and stop sharing. And again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining in today. I will just pass it off to Sarah Flynn for any last minute remarks. Anything on your end?
We're having to leave our space here. We're getting ejected, but it was wonderful to connect with you all, and we'll see you all in a month. So get going. I want to see what you can do. Bye, everyone.
Fantastic. I hope everyone has a lovely rest of the day and have a fantastic weekend. Thank you, everyone.